Today I will be making block G-8, also called Justin's Corner, from the Dear Jane quilt book. When we take a closer look at this block, we can see that it is a relatively simple block. This center star section is made up of 8 of these diamond shapes. They are all the same size, so I will be cutting a template, which I've already cut out, and I'm going to draw this template shape onto my focus fabric. Today, I've chosen this lovely blue fabric for my focus. I will draw that template shape onto the back of that fabric, leaving about 1/4 of an inch allowance all around. For each of these corners and triangles on the outer edge, those will be cut out of my muslin fabric, which is my background fabric. Since these are the parts that are on the outer edge for this block, I will cut them a little bit larger than just that 1/4 inch extra seam allowance, just to give me room to be able to trim my block. You could see on my block that I have the outline of the template drawn, and I have space in between each one, so that gives me that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I've traced the template on the back side of my fabric. Now let's cut out the pieces. My diamond pieces are now all cut out, and I'm going to be pinning them together, right sides together, and making sure that I get these points exactly matched up. So I pin that point, went right in there, and I pinned this point. I'll pin all of these together in pairs. I have 3 pins just so that I don't waver from this particular stitching line and that they don't separate, but I'll now stitch across this stitching line on all 4 pairs. I now have these 2 unit sections sewn together, so we're going to just lay this out so you can kind of see what the layout is. So there's the layout there. I have 4 squares. These are for the corners. These squares I've cut to 2 inches, and those should be plenty big to be able to sew in and have enough room for the seam allowance. And then for these corner triangles, what I did is cut 2 squares that are 2.5 inches, and I'm just going to cut them on the diagonal so that I'll have half the triangle here and half over here. Once I get these sections sewn together, these are going to be considered Y seams or inset seams, but that doesn't bother me. To do that kind of a seam, we generally would sew one side down and then press it, and then you'd fold it over and sew that side and press it. Y seams are actually pretty easy by hand because you can manipulate them a little bit easier, I find, than by machine. By machine, I have to be really careful not to go too far. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this center star together, and then I'll start working on these outer pieces. The center star is now sewn together, and on the back, if you can look faintly, you can see my stitching lines that I've drawn on. And I have my 4 squares cut, and I have on 2 sides my stitching line so that I can match those up to the stitching lines on the corners. So I have those. So those will go into each corner. And then also for this triangle section, here is the triangle created from that square that I cut in half. And I've also done the same thing of drawing the stitching lines that will correspond with the lines on the inside here. So what I'll do is I'll start with the triangles first, and then I will stitch in the squares. The triangles are now stitched in, and what I'm going to do is just trim the triangles straight on the edges right along there, so that way the squares will be able to be sewn in very nicely. As you can see, this block is nearly done, but I wanted to show you how I handle this corner. I've stitched this line, and now I want to stitch this seam to this. So it won't work this way, so we have to fold it over and match these two seams. The way I do that is I just fold it over and I've pinned right through that line and make sure that it lines up on this side. I need to shift just a little bit. There, now I'm going right through that line. Okay. And now let's get one more pin in place. And now I can stitch, and I'll stitch once again. I'll start right in this corner and stitch to the end. My block is now all stitched and pressed and ready to trim. Now when I put my ruler over my block, I can line it up so that we have the diagonals going across through the block. And the center is right in the center of that. Now, you might be noticing something. I have a little bit of an oops here, and at this point we're just going to let it go. But if you can notice, my points are right up to the edge of my ruler. So those points are going to be chopped off when I stitch it together. I could restitch the block and try to make that smaller to get it to fit, but at this point I'm just going to trim it as is. We'll do the best that we can. There we have the finished block G-8, Justin's Comet. I do hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of how to make this block, and maybe it'll help you on making your own block. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below or send me an email at sewitseamscreations@outlook.com. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you can get notified when the next block comes out, which is hopefully every Monday. This is Veronica with Sew It Seams, and we'll see you next time.